Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. On the program, we return to our All Things Africa edition, our journey across the continent, looking at the history and current affairs of each nation. We now explore the West African country of Guinea, and who better to teach us about this country or any African country than our returning champion, the brilliant historian and journalist and anti-imperialist activist Abayomi Azikiwe of Pan-African Newswire, and he's also a frequent contributor to Black Agenda Reports, who will be our guide on this trip to Guinea's history and current affairs. So, Abayomi, first off, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much.
Always an honor. Always an honor to have you. And yes, and always an honor to have you on. And as always, folks, please help One Plus One by sharing widely our content. Facebook is still limiting how much we can share and post, so please share widely One Plus One across your social media and your emails. And as always, folks, please donate also generously to Pan African Newswire and Black Agenda Report. And please donate if you can to One Plus One. Share all of our content, past and present, and help us overcome the far right algorithms and help us overcome the monopoly Western corporate media and Western state media has in the social media world by sharing widely all of One Plus One's content and again donating to us. And now, on to the topic at hand. So Abayomi, as always, tell us what was Guinea like before French colonization, and when France colonized Guinea, what were the conditions of the people like?
Well, like other states in the region, there's a lot of overlapping in regard to the history. Guinea Conakry was part of the larger empires, so-called medieval empires in West Africa. They were either within those empires or on the margin of them, namely Ghana between the 8th and the 11th century. Then, of course, there was the rise of the Mali Empire and later the Songhai Empire. They were involved in all of these developments taking place in West Africa due to the intervention of French, British, and Portuguese imperialism through the Atlantic slave trade. These empires began to decline. Also, outside interventions, for example, from the people in Morocco, the Saudi dynasty, beginning in the late 16th century, disrupted the trans-Saharan trade that was dominated by the indigenous people in the West Africa region. So the areas went into an economic decline. There were efforts to revive the areas under smaller kingdoms and city-states. And for example, in the 17th century, there was the rise of an Islamic state in the Fouta Djallon, which is in central Guinea. And of course, in other areas too, there was resistance to the encroachment of French imperialism. And this went on, of course, during the 19th century and up until the beginning of the 20th century. The country of Guinea is extremely rich in regard to mineral resources. And we can talk about that later, but they were impacted negatively by the rise of French colonialism and imperialism, which stripped the sovereignty as well as the national wealth from Guinea.
Talk to us a bit more about what the conditions were like for the people, not just the workers, obviously, but also
Mhm.
just the just in general when we talk about institutional racism, white supremacy, and whatnot.
Yeah, all of that was instituted once the French consolidated their rule in that region. They set out to conquer any independent or viable kingdom in the region. I mentioned the Fouta Djallon. There was also the Malinke groupings who were also very prominent in the area. The Fouta Djallon did resist the encroachment of French imperialism. They were eventually defeated. And the Malinke people under Samori Touré during the 1880s and 1890s waged perhaps the most formidable struggle against French colonialism in the region. Samori Touré was able to mobilized thousands of fighters and to put up a series of battles against France. And he also had to fight other groups in the area which had succumbed to French colonialism by signing treaties with them, and he had to fight those interests as well. Nonetheless, eventually in 1898, Samori Touré was captured by the French imperialists. They exiled him initially to Senegal. He strongly objected to that. They broke up his family. His wife remained in Guinea. And then after that, he was sent to Gabon, where he died purportedly of pneumonia in 1900. So after that period, they were able to consolidate French rule in the area. Prior to that, after the Berlin Conference of 1884 and 1885, they negotiated the modern day boundaries of the Republic of Guinea-Conakry. This was done in conjunction with the British as well as the Portuguese. The Portuguese took control of the area that's now known as Guinea-Bissau, and the French took control of the area that is now known as Guinea-Conakry. Today, Guinea-Conakry has an estimated population of about 14.6 million people. And since the rise of colonialism, the country was severely set back in regard to its own national development, while the resources that existed there were looted by the French in conjunction with other imperialist powers.
Unbelievable. And how did that's a perfect segue to this question. So of course, how did Guinea become independent? And was it a peaceful transition or one of violent struggle? And then tell us about the nation's roughly 2 decades under the leadership of Ahmed Sekou Touré, who ruled from October the 2nd, 1958 to March 26, 1984. He was a Marxist, and he imposed what some would describe as a Marxist or Marxist-Leninist rule, or others communistic, and certainly ruled with a far left-leaning one-party rule. How do you assess his legacy when we talk about socioeconomics, specifically for the vast majority of the people of Guinea who are still majority poor, and the party he led, which is still a major party in Guinea, is the Democratic Party of Guinea African Democratic Rally, whose ideology, according to Wikipedia, African nationalism, African socialism, Pan-Africanism, Marxism, integral nationalism, democratic centralism. So its political positions vastly left-wing, and while they were never a member of the International Communist Association, which still existed today, it was a member of the left-wing anti-colonial Pan-African, mainly of French-speaking colonies or former colonies, known as the African Democratic Rally. So do respond to all of that.
Yeah, the PDG was formed during the early 1950s, and they were part, as you just mentioned, of the Rassemblement Démocratique Africain, the RDA. And however, they broke with the RDA in 1958 because they were largely isolated due to their vote against the Laurent Cadre proposal of the Gaullist administration in France. We talked about earlier,
yeah,
as the titular head of against the rule of Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, the Vichy government, which was established in 1940 as a way of capitulating to the rule of the German Third Reich. Then, of course, there was the resistance, the liberal and moderate resistance, as well as the left resistance, which is not often talked about in regard to the struggle to defeat fascism in Europe. There's a lot of talk about de Gaulle, but very little in regard to the role that the left played in the resistance. And so this has been a area that needs correcting in the overall history of the 20th century in Europe. In 1958, de Gaulle had this proposal for, quote, greater autonomy within the French method of rule in their West African colonies, what is termed as French West Africa. Guinea became a part of French West Africa, which was broken up into 8 different areas in West Africa. Places like Mauritania, Senegal, and others were part of this whole construct. Then in 1958, there was a referendum on the future of Guinea and all the other West African colonies. A lot of this had to do with the necessity of reconfiguring French colonialism in Africa. And why was that necessary? Well, in 1954, after World War II, the French attempted to retake the northern region of Vietnam, and they were met with fierce resistance by the Viet Minh, which was led by the Vietnamese Communist Party at the time, headed by Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh, of course, was the founder of the Indo-Chinese Communist Party back in 1930. Nonetheless, in their attempt, they were defeated at Dien Bien Phu. Was a major battle that the Viet Minh were able to exact huge casualties against the French colonial forces. They agreed to withdraw from North Vietnam. And in that same year, the Algerian National Liberation Front, the FLN, embarked upon a consolidated armed struggle demanding French independence from France. This started in 1954. The war intensified. And by 1958, the Fourth Republic in France was in deep crisis, economically and politically. So de Gaulle came up with this scheme to consolidate colonial rule in other parts of Africa outside of Algeria. And they had a huge campaign encouraging people to vote yes in Guinea and all the other French colonies under the control of Paris. Well, the Democratic Party of Guinea under Secretary Touré voted no overwhelmingly by more than 90%. And the country was declared independent on October the 2nd of 1958. Now, what was the response of France to this no vote by the PDG? In essence, they declared war on the independent government in Guinea. They withdrew technical support, financial assistance, structural assistance. For example, the construction of sewage lines in Conakry was suspended. They ripped out phones. They destroyed the telecommunication system in Conakry. They rejected the establishment of an independent Guinean franc because they withdrew from the French CFA franc zone. Also, later on, through the SAC, which is the French intelligence services under the Gaullists, the committee, the intelligence committee, was called the SAC, that was led by a man by the name of Jean Foucault. The first plot, after withdrawing all of the technical, financial, and material and structural support, Kwame Nkrumah, who was the prime minister at that time in Ghana, loaned the Guinean government under the PDG 10 million US dollars, which prevented a complete economic collapse. And they formed what was known as the Ghana-Guinea Union in 1958. Yet, in 1960, this French intelligence agency, the SAC, devised a plot to flood the country with fake Guinean franc notes. Millions of them were distributed inside the country in an effort to facilitate hyperinflation, which they felt would lead to a total economic collapse. And if that happened, they were assuming that the people in Guinea would rise up against the PDG, overthrow the government, and reinstitute French neocolonialism. Wow. This did not happen because the plan was intercepted by the then prime minister of neighboring Senegal. The prime minister of Senegal, who was later purged and imprisoned in 1962, was a rival of the president Leopold Sédar Senghor, who was one of the proponents of the negritude philosophy. Yet, the negritude philosophy, as articulated by Senghor, called for a close alliance and even dominance by the French imperialist system. So there was a plot actually by the SAC to import arms through Senegal into Guinea. They mobilized Guinean opposition forces along with French paratroopers in an effort to stage an invasion to overthrow the government in Guinea. This was in early 1960. Well, the plot was uncovered by the then Prime Minister of Senegal. And this, of course, led to tensions between Senghor and the then Prime Minister of Senegal. So the plot was foiled and it was not successful. So it just shows the vicious character of French colonialism and imperialism. This same intelligence agency assassinated leaders of the Cameroonian liberation movement, the Union of Peoples of Cameroon, the UPC. People like Ruben Naombe and others were killed by the French intelligence agencies in an effort to prevent Cameroon from uniting as well as moving towards a non-capitalist path of development. So Guinea, in response to what the French did, formed this union with Ghana. They also tried to work with the United States government under Dwight Eisenhower. Secretary Ray visited the United States in 1959 on a state visit, and he was, of course, featured on the cover of Ebony magazine during that year because he was a major figure in post-independence African politics. Later, after 1960, they became a one-party state. The party and the government were virtually inseparable. All other political parties were outlawed, and this remained the case during the 1960s. In 1967, there was the third Congress of the PDG, which took place in Conakry, where further changes were made within the political system there. So that gives you some idea of what happened between the early 1950s with the formation of the PDG within the context of the Rassemblement Démocratique Africaine, the RDA, the rejection of the French proposal under de Gaulle for greater autonomy within the French colonial system, and then, of course, the independence of the country in October of 1958, the defeat of these efforts to sabotage the country through the SAC, first through the distribution of fake banknotes, and then later an attempt to stage an invasion in 1960. So all of these things were taking place during this particular time period. They attempted to develop relations with the United States. Now, the United States was willing to talk with the Guinean government and also to set up economic joint projects, not because they believed in the independence of Africa, but they saw it as an opening to fill the vacuum left by the French colonialists. And that was the policy of the subsequent Kennedy administration, which was elected in 1960 and came to office in 1961. Kennedy had reached out to the Ghana government and other governments, even the government in Algeria under Ben Bella. They had invited him to the United States in 1962 after they gained their independence from France. And I mentioned this in a previous program that when Ben Bella came to the United States and met with the Kennedy administration, this was a stopover en route to Cuba, where the revolution was in its infancy. And they informed Ben Bella that he should not go to Cuba because his plane could be shot down by anti-Castro Cubans who were, of course, the product of the Central Intelligence Agency in an effort to reverse the revolutionary movement in Cuba. So with the isolation of Guinea Conakry from the French imperialist system, the early years of independence were very difficult. He also reached out to the Soviet Union, to the Federal Socialist Republic of Yugoslavia, developing joint economic projects with them as well. Guinea was a part of the non-aligned movement, which was formally initiated in 1960 and 1961. And of course, after the overthrow of Patrice Lumumba in 1960 and his subsequent execution in January of 1961, there was a huge split within the independent African states over how to move forward. You had the development of the so-called Casablanca group, which was a minority grouping within independent Africa, which took on a more anti-imperialist posture, which called for unity among the African states. This contradicted the so-called Monrovia and Brazzaville groupings, which were pro-French and pro-imperialist. So already after 1961, there was a huge gulf among the independent African states. Now, Secretary in 1962 set out to try to mediate the differences between the Casablanca group and the Monrovia and Brazzaville groupings. In 1960, the government in Mali the country of Mali became independent, and under Modibo Keita, and they joined the Ghana-Guinea Union, became the Ghana-Guinea-Mali Union. And then when the Belgian Congo became independent in June of 1960, Nkrumah sought to bring the Republic of Congo into this union with Mali, Guinea, and Ghana. That did not happen, of course, because of the destabilization campaign that was leveled against the newly formed government under the MNC, the Congolese National Movement in Congo, Leopoldville at the time. And of course, Lumumba came to the United States trying to seek assistance from the Eisenhower administration in 1960. Eisenhower refused to even meet with him. And then, of course, there was this famous National Security Council meeting that took place the same year. And it's been written about by people who were actually in the room during this meeting. Eisenhower stated that something had to be done about Patrice Lumumba. And everybody in the room knew exactly what that meant. So there were all these attempts to poison him, which failed. And then, of course, he was placed under house arrest after the United Nations sent in a peacekeeping force, which Lumumba had requested. But this peacekeeping force, when they came into the country, actually objectively sided with the enemies of Patrice Lumumba. So after Lumumba's assassination, it sparked outrage across Africa and indeed across the world. There was a rebellion at the United Nations led by African-American political forces in New York.
Brother Malcolm was a good friend to Congo Solidarity at the time.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly. And what happened was that the then representative to the United Nations, Adlai Stevenson, who had ran twice as a Democrat for the presidency in 1952, he lost to Eisenhower. He ran again in 1956. He lost again to President Dwight D. Eisenhower. When Kennedy came in, he was appointed as the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. And he was there when this rebellion broke out, quite embarrassing for the United States. And he said, to the extent that these people are U.S. citizens, I deeply apologize on behalf of the United States government. This is what he said.
Wow.
So anyway, Ahmed Secretary set out to try to mediate these differences. And out of that whole process, the Organization of African Unity was formed in May of 1963 in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. The OAU from its inception was a compromise between the Monrovia and Brazzaville groups and the Casablanca group. Nonetheless, they did form a OAU Liberation Committee, which was able to funnel assistance to the liberation movements that were operating across Africa at the time. So all of this was going on in West Africa. greater consolidation, greater consciousness, a move towards socialist orientation in Ghana, Guinea, and Mali. However, the imperialists were not sitting idly by. And we know what happened in subsequent years with the overthrow of the Ghana government, the further attacks on the Guinea Conakry under the PDG, and of course the overthrow of Modibo Keita in 1968 in Mali. In
And,
19... Go ahead.
well, yeah. Well, I just wanted to ask how do you assess his socioeconomic domestic policies, with Sekou Toure, who is widely regarded as being of the far left, and so I'm very curious your response on that.
Well, there was greater growing divisions that took place inside the PDG and inside of Guinea itself, particularly after the 1967 Third Congress of the PDG. There were purges of leading public figures that have been associated with the Guinean government. For example, Oscar Marouf, who was the representative of Guinea at the United Nations. He was recalled after the 1967 Third Congress of the PDG and replaced. He was later imprisoned. It was never clear exactly what the reasons were behind his imprisonment. Also, Diallo Telli, who was the first Secretary General of the Organization of African Unity, also was withdrawn and pretty much disappeared. Later, it was revealed that these people died in detention, and that served to a great degree to damage, among certain elements, the image and of Ahmed Sékou Touré. Now, in 1970, things really came to a head when the Portuguese staged an attempted invasion of Guinea. Guinea had served as a rear base for the African Party for the Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde, the PAIGC, that was led by Amilcar Cabral, a brilliant African engineer, agronomist, tactician, and military strategist who built from the ground up the PAIGC as a force to be reckoned with. It began as a civilian independence movement, but then after 1959, there was a massacre of dock workers in Guinea-Bissau by the Portuguese colonial authorities. By 1963, they had embarked upon a armed revolutionary struggle to overthrow Portuguese colonialism. Now, Portugal was perhaps one of the poorest countries in the European continent, and their colonial system was extremely vicious. I mean, it was tantamount to enslavement, even in the 20th century.
And with
So
and Portugal itself was a fascist dictatorship, along with neighboring Spain, also a fascist dictatorship. But even at the peak of its fascism, the Portuguese never ever, well, of course, I mean they're far right capitalists, but they never ever, even equally divided, the wealth of the
yes,
colony that they had amongst their own people. Hence, yeah, but yeah,
yeah. Salazar was an outright fascist who ruled there for decades. Then later, Catano also ruled. He was the one that was overthrown in April of 1974. But before we get to that, the developments in 1970, they had Guinean opposition forces and Portuguese paratroopers in an operation they call Operation Green Sea. The idea was to land these forces in Conakry, which is right on the Atlantic Ocean. They would go and either kill or kidnap Ahmed Sékou Touré, the president, and Amilcar Cabral, who was the leader of the PAIGC. They also went at the Boiro prison in Conakry and broke it open and released a number of people who were held there in prison, including initially Oscar Marouf. who was pretty much in poor health at the time and was going blind. But he was eventually recaptured by the Guinean forces. So this invasion of Portugal by Portugal of Guinea-Conakry in 1970 failed. It was not successful. They were able to take some of the Portuguese prisoners that had been held in Guinea. These are people who were captured by the PAIGC during various military battles inside the country. Then, after 1970, in response to the attempted overthrow of the PDG and the murder of the PAIGC leader, there was a huge arrest, prosecutions, and purges from the PDG and the Guinean government. These purges took place within the military, within the police, and also among ministers who had served in the PDG government. So authority rapidly became more and more concentrated around Ahmed Sékou Touré as a personality and his close collaborators. This went on during the early and mid 1970s. Now, during this period, the PDG government began to develop the bauxite resources that exist in the country. Guinea has perhaps the largest deposit of bauxite of any other geopolitical region in the world. And they wanted to exploit these resources. And of course, bauxite transformed into alumina and eventually aluminum, which is a major profit-making industry within the world capitalist system. So they developed these industries, but it was done in partnership with U.S. Multinational corporations and also in partnership with the Guinean government. Approximately half of the ownership was with the transnational corporation, and the other half was with the Guinean government. But despite all of this, the country still remained underdeveloped. The majority of the people were impoverished. And a lot of people left the country due to the economic problems that largely stemmed from the role of French colonialism and the insidious role of the United States and the transnational corporations in Guinea. So between 1970, the early 1970s and the mid 1970s, the situation economically continued to deteriorate in Guinea.
And that's I find that quite sad because and that's actually a perfect segue to this question. So you already talked about you've already sort of assessed his foreign policy, which at best we can describe as it had some good, it had some bad. Even when it comes to the continent of Africa, it had some good, it had some bad. If you already talked to us about the Portuguese under the fascist dictatorship, uh, which still had African colonies up until the 1980s and their efforts to try to overthrow Touré. Now, Touré, sadly, at the peak of his leadership, Touré started to roll back some of the advancements of his left-wing policies at home, and even started to roll back his anti-imperialist alliances, his anti-Western alliances, and began to embrace the Western imperial order and be closely tied to both France in the American sphere of influence. Talk to us about that, and then also talk to us about Touré's shocking death from when he was operated during a heart surgery. Guinea was then ruled for 4 years under his successor, Louis Lansana
Conti.
Yes, Bouvogi. I'm sorry, folks, for butchering his name. And Wikipedia said that he only ruled for 8 days and was later ousted in the coup. Talk to us about Guinea under the leadership of then Colonel Lassana Conte. He ruled from 1993 to 1998, and then from 2003 to December 22nd, 2008. How do you assess his legacy and that of his party, the Party of Unity and Progress, which advocates and when in power advanced economic liberalism and to give us your critical assessment of his foreign policy for Guinea during his time in office.
Well, first, I think it's important to mention that in 1966, when the Central Intelligence Agency engineered a military and police coup d'etat against the First Republic of Ghana under the Convention People's Party headed then by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, it was interesting that coup, that it was said to have been a military coup, but CIA operatives in later years said that they set it up to make it appear as if the Ghanaians had carried out the coup, when in fact it was coordinated and engineered completely by the Central Intelligence Agency and the US State Department. When that happened, Nkrumah was en route to North Vietnam with a proposal to bring about a ceasefire and a peaceful resolution to the US military occupation of Vietnam, which had intensified after 1965 under Lyndon Baines Johnson. Under John F. Kennedy, who was no angel,
exactly.
He sent in military advisors from 1961 up until the time he was assassinated in 1963 that numbered thousands of personnel, including Central Intelligence Agency operatives as well. And they were saying that they were just there in an advisory capacity. But US soldiers were being killed in Vietnam during this period. And in 1963, about 3 weeks before Kennedy was assassinated, he had issued a national security memorandum, which called for a small but phased withdrawal of U.S. advisors, quote advisors, which were military troops from Vietnam. And this caused a panic among the military industrial complex and right-wing elements within the Central Intelligence Agency, some of which had already been purged after the Bay of Pigs fiasco of April of 1961. For example, John Foster Dulles, Cabell, these people were like the co-founders of the CIA, which came about after the conclusion of World War II.
And central players in the Dwight Eisenhower administration as well.
Exactly, and his ascendancy to power and so forth. So Kennedy was assassinated on November 22nd of 1963. And it was quite interesting that Cabell's brother was the mayor of Dallas when Kennedy was assassinated. The motorcade route was changed the same morning of the assassination, so it would drive past the Texas Book Depository and the infamous triple underpass. And it's been a debate since that day over whether the shots came from the Texas School Book Depository or they came from the grassy knoll right before you get to the triple underpass. Nonetheless, after his assassination, when Lyndon Johnson came to power after his assassination, in 1964, there was the famous Gulf of Tonkin incident, which was used as a pretext to increase U.S. military presence in Vietnam. Of course, the Gulf of Tonkin incident turned out to be a hoax, but it was utilized to justify a military buildup in Vietnam. And what was interesting about the 1964 election in the United States is that Barry Goldwater, who was an extreme Republican right-wing operative, who was a senator, he was portrayed as the pro-war candidate.
Yes,
and Johnson
yes.
was portrayed as a more reasonable candidate who was for peace.
Yeah.
It's very interesting contradictions. And Goldwater, of course, opposed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. There was a commercial by the Johnson campaign during 1964 where there's a child being shown playing with flowers in an open field, and then all of a sudden you see a huge mushroom cloud that explodes, implying that if Goldwater was elected, there would be a thermonuclear war with the Soviet Union. It turned out that after Johnson won by a landslide the 1964 elections and took office, was sworn in again in January of 1965. 2 months later, hundreds of thousands of U.S. troops were ordered into Vietnam. The Vietnam War escalated. It became more bloody. And of course, in 1968, there was the Tet Offensive. And after the Tet Offensive, uh, apprehension among the American public grew in regard to the viability of victory in Vietnam. And that fueled the anti-war movement. People like the within the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, they had already taken a clear position against the Vietnam War as early as January of 1966. Martin Luther King and the SCLC withheld their opposition, at least publicly. They had made statements, in regard to their trepidation about the war. But it wasn't until January of 1967, in a series of letters to the editor that King wrote to the Black press, and his speech at the Nation magazine fundraiser in February of 1967, entitled The Casualties of the Vietnam War. He participated in a demonstration in Chicago in March of 1967 against the Vietnam War. And on April 4th of 1967, just 1 year prior to his assassination at Riverside Church in Manhattan, he came out clearly in opposition to the Vietnam War. Not only in opposition to the Vietnam War, he characterized the Vietnam War as part and parcel of the growing militarism and imperialism of the United States. And of course, after that happened, he came under fire. But to go back to 1966, Nkrumah, while he was still president of Ghana, had cabled Lyndon Johnson and told him about this plan, which was a Commonwealth plan that came out of the Commonwealth, to try to negotiate some type of peaceful conclusion, at least a ceasefire, to the so-called Vietnam War, which was really the U.S. imperialist occupation of Vietnam.
Yeah.
They took over after the French were smashed in 1954. And after the defeat of the French in 1954, it had been promised to Ho Chi Minh that they would hold elections throughout the country to determine the future of Vietnam, which would lead to the unity of Vietnam, the South and the North. So Nkrumah notified Johnson that he was going to embark on this project, and Johnson said, well, I won't do anything to interfere with your mission, because they could have easily shot down the plane that Nkrumah in February of 1966. Well, that was a lie. They had already for several years had drawn up plans on how to engineer a coup in Ghana. So in 66, Nkrumah was overthrown. And when he came back to Africa, he was trying to decide where he would go. Several countries offered him asylum. Guinea was the closest to Ghana, and they were in a union with Nkrumah's government in Ghana. So he went to Guinea, and he was met in Conakry by thousands upon thousands of supporters of the PDG for an open rally. And it was announced by Secretary that President Nkrumah was not just the president of Ghana, he is a African, Pan-Africanist figure. And today I'm going to appoint him as the co-president of the Republic of Guinea. So this had never been done on the African continent before. So I think that was a very, very important act of solidarity. Nkrumah stayed there. He was able to write and was able to do organizing work from a villa at Sili in Guinea. So all these developments were taking place. So we left off dealing with the period between 1970, the invasion by the Portuguese and their operatives. Nonetheless, the economic situation continued to deteriorate. And a critical point, turning point in the post-colonial history in Guinea was the so-called Market Women's Revolt that took place in 1977. The economic situation continued to deteriorate, and the market women, which were important strata within Guinean society, they ran the Medina market, one of the largest markets in West Africa. There were disputes that developed over price controls in the Guinean market, and the women revolted. And this revolt spread throughout the country. So after that point, it appeared as if the PDG government began to liberalize the economy. In 1978, there was efforts to develop some type of rapprochement with the French under Valery Destin Guizzard. In 1979, he traveled to Guinea, first French president to travel there since the independence in 1958. And in a few years later, Secretary Ray did visit France as well. In 1979, Secretary Ray was invited and came to the United States under Jimmy Carter, met with the Carter administration. So these were indications that there was a liberalization process that was taking place in Guinea, which after 1978 was named the People's Revolutionary Republic of Guinea. So this went on. Then in 1982, Secretary Ray came back to the United States. In New York, he was hosted by David Rockefeller. And he also went to the White House and met with the then President Ronald Reagan. So these were clear indications that there were changes in both the political and economic trajectory of Guinea. But despite this, in 1984, Secretary Ray was on a state visit to Saudi Arabia, where he reportedly collapsed from a heart attack. And he was flown to the Cleveland Clinic in the United States, supposedly for open heart surgery, where it was said he died on the operating table. This was in late March of 1984. So this was a huge shock to the international community. People were not aware that he was even ill. People that I've talked to who had been around Secretary Ray and had visited Guinea said one factor in this could have been that he was a chain smoker. And he was 62 years old, and that is not a good practice, even for a young person. And if you're a senior citizen and you're chain smoking, clearly that is going to cause a lot of difficulties.
Yeah.
So he was flown back to Guinea for a state funeral, which I believe took place on April the 3rd of 1984. And his death led to the appointment of a new president, Bevo Guy.
Yeah.
Bevo Guy only served perhaps 2 or 3 days. And then there was a military coup by lower-ranking officers within the Guinean military that overthrew the PDG and the Guinean government, with almost no resistance on the part of the other elements within the military, the paramilitary forces, the party personnel, the militias, the police. The appearance was there was relatively no opposition to his overthrow. So this was really a big shock to the supporters of the Guinean government. For example, Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, moved to Guinea permanently in late 1968, early 1969, with his then wife, Miriam Makeba.
Yeah.
After their marriage in 1968, Miriam Makeba became almost completely isolated by the United States political and entertainment system. All of her dates, in terms of performances, were canceled in 1968. She had a strong relationship with Harry Belafonte, who was a major entertainer and actor in the United States. He originally came from the Caribbean. His ancestors came from the Caribbean. And he broke ties with her as early as 1967 when she refused to go along with his pro-Israeli stance. That was...
Really?
Yes.
Henry,
he never, as progressive as...
Time out for a moment. Okay. Henry Belafonte was Zionist?
I wouldn't say he was a Zionist, but he refused to take a position in support of Palestine and against the Zionist regime in occupied
Yeah, no,
Palestine.
because
Yeah,
he often has the reputation of being one of the more very
left
much
wing.
left factions of the civil rights movement.
Exactly.
The one of the more left, one of the more unapologetically radical leftists, advisors to Martin Luther King
Hmm.
Jr. And even towards the end of his life, he very much became, very much disillusioned with the Democratic Party and the very rightward shift, not just of Bill Clinton, although he did believe in lesser evilism. But
Right.
by the time Obama came into power, he very much was very disillusioned with electoral politics and the Democrats being the savior. So that's why I'm quite surprised that he would not.
Well, there
Anyway,
have been others as well who have taken good positions, for example, against the former apartheid system in South Africa, and support, at least in principle, the liberation movements in Africa. Nonetheless, in regard to the Palestinian question, he never recorrected those errors. And so Mary McCabe and her then husband, Stokely Carmichael, who later became Kwame Ture, moved to Guinea in early 1969 permanently. Now, supposedly, their relationship started during the Third Congress of the Democratic Party of Guinea in 1967, while Carmichael was on his first tour of Africa. And at that time, he had just stepped down as the chair of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. And he went to Puerto Rico while he was still chairman of SNCC. And then later, that was his first foreign policy mission to support the independence movement in Puerto Rico. Then he went to Cuba for a Latin American Solidarity Conference in June of 1967. Then he went to the Dialectics of Liberation Conference in London, where a man by the name of his name his he became a very prominent figure in the anti-Soviet left in the United States, and he was an academic, and he wrote essays on Soviet Marxism and so forth.
but it was
Um,
but it was hostile. Was an anti-communist leftist.
Anti-Soviet anyway.
Okay, okay.
Anti-Soviet anyway. So he, Carmichael attended the this conference, Dialectical of Liberation Conference, that was held in June 1967 in London. Herbert Marcuse, I might as well mention his name. That was him. Uh, his
Yeah, yeah, yes, yes,
his
yes, yes.
writings were distributed heavily during the 1960s, and a lot of people were influenced by him during that particular time period.
Including
Uh,
including Angela Davis and the very
exactly.
famous 60 Minutes producer, later PBS Frontline producer Lowell Bergman, who quits
Mm-hmm.
famously quits CBS well, folks should watch the movie The Insider about the big tobacco whistleblower that 60 Minutes practically threw under the bus, but then Lowell Bergman sort of blew the whistle on them, and then later they aired the entire segment uncensored, and he quit 60 Minutes, but then later he became a very well-known journalism professor, as well as a guy who did some documentaries for PBS Frontline. He was both he and Angela Davis were students of Herbert Marcuse. So yeah.
Exactly. He had a lot of influence during that particular time period. Now, Carmichael and McCabe moved to Guinea-Conakry in 1969, but it wasn't announced until July of 1969 by Mariam McCabe. She had called a press conference at, I believe it was JFK Airport in New York, where she released a letter that was written by Carmichael, where he resigned from the Black Panther Party. This was the Black Panther Party, not the one he formed in Alabama in 1965, but the Black Panther Party that grew out of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense that was based in Oakland, California, headed by Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale. So that caused quite a stir in the United States, that this letter was released, and the perception was that Carmichael was abandoning the struggle, which he had been a central part of since the early 1960s, abandoning the struggle of Black liberation inside the United States. He, of course, denied that, but he was having problems with the leadership of the Black Panther Party, the one based in Oakland, California, going back to 1968. In fact, SNCC and the Black Panther Party had attempted an alliance that grew out of the campaign to free Huey P. Newton. But what was interesting about it was that Eldridge Cleaver, at this rally in Oakland in February of 1968, described their relationship as emergent. They had appointed Carmichael as the honorary prime minister, James Foreman as honorary foreign minister, and H. Rap Brown as an honorary minister of justice. So anyway, in 1969, they left and went to Guinea. But after I just wanted to bring that in to show the parallels, between the African American liberation movement and the struggle for Pan-Africanism on the continent, in the personage of Ahmed Sékou Touré and others, Amilcar Cabral, who Carmichael met with extensively while Cabral was living in Conakry as the leader of the PAIGC. So in 1977, we can move forward now. There was the market women's revolt. Then in 1978, there was a greater liberalization, attempted liberalization of the Guinea economy, and the visits to France and the United States in 1979, then again in 1982, and then the sudden death of Ahmed Sékou Touré in March of 1984. Then there was the overthrow of the PDG almost immediately after the state funeral of Ahmed Sékou Touré, which created shock and confusion among many people. For example, the All African People's Revolutionary Party, which is still active in the United States and other areas around the world. Kwame Touré was the leader of that organization, which had been called for by Kwame Nkrumah in 1968 while he was living in Guinea. It was published in a book called The Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, where he calls for the formation of an All-African Committee for Political Coordination and an All-African People's Revolutionary Army headed by an All-African People's Revolutionary Party. So after Nkrumah's death in 1972, Touré, who was still known as Stokely Carmichael at the time, became the virtual leader of the AAPRP. It became public in October of 1972 in Washington, D.C. at Howard University. And then he was traveling around the country, even came to Detroit that year and announced the formation of the AAPRP. But after Sékou Touré's overthrow in 1984, he was replaced by extreme right-wing military junta that was headed by Lansana Conté and another colleague of his.
Yeah.
Who was purged and executed the following year under the guise that he had attempted to stage a coup against Lansana Conté. Now, as you read before, the political character of that regime in Guinea was extremely right-wing. They wanted to normalize relations with France, with the United States. They repudiated any inkling of scientific socialism or anti-imperialism and anti-capitalism. They wanted a free market. They wanted, quote, free speech, freedom of association, and so forth, which did not happen in reality. So Conté, after 1985, became the sole ruler of the Guinean state, and he prevailed for well over 20 years.
Yeah.
Until he died in office. In fact, he even put on a suit and ran for president and was elected, as president of Guinea, although, their politics had not changed at all. And this continued all the way into the 2000s. And after his death, There was, of course, destabilization,
Actually,
further military coup.
Abayomi, wasn't he also overthrown in a military coup? Uh,
Yeah, he became ill and was removed from office
okay, okay.
by military leaders in the country who did a very poor job in stabilizing the country, continued to drift into poverty and instability. And eventually, they did hold multi-party elections. Uh, After his death, Alpha Conde, who had been in the opposition, was elected, and he served.
In fact, let me just let me just interrupt you there.
Go ahead.
Guinea then goes full right wing, full, call it what you want, neocolonialism, neoliberalism, and whatnot, but they go pretty much fully right wing. And then Conte, he's then replaced in office by two military leaders, Musa Dadi Kamara and
Right,
Sakuba Konance. And then as you mentioned, comes the rise of Alpha Conte. So now democracy or civilian rule. So that finally returns to Guinea, and Guinea found themselves under the democratically elected Alpha Conde, who was elected in 2010, then re-elected 2015, and then again in 2020 until he himself was thrown in the coup. Now, his party, the Rally for the Ghanaian People, which he founded in 1960, a long time a left alternative to the ruling party of Touré at the time, long time opposition party to the right-leaning juntas and right-wing ruling parties. On paper, and according to Wikipedia, the ideology of Condé and his party is of social democracy, democratic socialism, left-leaning progressivism, and they are members of Socialist International and Progressive Alliance, which are both organizations where center-left and social democratic parties and other left-leaning parties meet to advance a left-leaning agenda and see how they can help one another out globally. However, it's dominated by the Western European and Nordic center left parties, which have a terrible track record regarding imperialism and not challenging the central thesis that capitalism is a scourge on humanity. And they have often acted as social imperialists. And once upon a time, at least towards their Western social base, they would be fighting for workers' rights and other issues dear to the cause of leftism. But since the 1980s and up to now, they've pivoted to the right on domestic socioeconomics. So now it's the worst of both worlds. And also important to add that when talking about Socialist International and Progressive, and that's also very important when we talk about Socialist International and Progressive Alliance and their members. But Abayomi, how do you assess the legacy of Alpha Conde, both domestically and internationally? I'm very curious.
well, the country really didn't improve economically, and it was the same type of authoritarian process of governance. Uh, Although Condes purportedly won the election in the first election, the problem is that he was corrupt. He was elected twice. He was only supposed to serve 2 terms. They altered the Constitution, and he ran for a third term. And the fact that the country did not improve economically, he was overthrown in 2021 by a military operative, a man by the name of Mamadou Doumbouya,
Yeah.
who had been a part of the French Foreign Legion. He had been trained as a part of the French National Police. He's married to a French woman. And after he was overthrown, he was put in detention. That's Condé by the new military rulers in Guinea under Doumbouya. And due to international pressure and the suspension of Guinea, the Guinean under the military at that time, he was released supposedly to receive medical treatment abroad. So Doumbouya has been ruling the country for the last 4 years. This week, after postponing efforts to move towards a political and multi-party democratic system, they're holding a referendum in Guinea on the future of the country. So we'll see how that comes out. Um,
Okay.
that's taking place this week in Guinea. But just to go back, for example,
So
Stokely
so so so
Carmichael.
so 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 Conde so Conde is one of those leftists who might talk from the left, but when he's in power, governs from the right, and
Exactly,
and then continues to maintain close ties with the Western imperialists.
exactly.
And then how do you it's so that's very interesting. And then how do you assess the Guinea currency under under the military leadership or fake civilian democracy of Mamadi Duma Boya?
Well, it's interesting. When he came to power, and this was after the second military coup d'etat in neighboring Mali. Um, he had called for the mining companies, the bauxite companies, those that mine bauxite and iron ore, as well as gold and diamonds. Guinea is a very wealthy country in terms of strategic metals and minerals. He called for them to invest in other sectors of the national economy, which I don't think has happened as of yet. But it's interesting that he did not join the Alliance of Sahel States, the AES, along with Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso when that was formed in 2023 after the July 26th seizure of power by the CNSP government in Niger. So they remained outside of the AES. So did Senegal under its new president, President Faye, in Senegal. So we'll have to see what the outcome of this referendum will be. There's been a lot of instability inside the country since the 1990s in Guinea. In 1992, there was an attempt to have multi-party elections, and there was violence throughout the country. The PDG, it was an effort to revive the party after the overthrow of Secretary Ray and the banning of the PDG, but has not been able to regain power. It was reported that during the 1992 elections, they only won something like 3 or 4% of the vote. Now, we don't know how accurate that is, but in terms of the political history of the country over the last 41 years, the left has not been able to regain political momentum, let alone political power inside the country, which is a tragedy in and of itself, because the country is still in the grips of neocolonialism and imperialism, and despite the fact that it's very rich in regard to its resources.
Well, you've just answered my question on does France and its allies continue to have a strong influence on Ghanaian on Ghanaian affairs. Uh, very briefly, before I get to these last two questions, what's been Guinea's response to the mainly anti-French African Spring that's been happening mostly in Western Africa, as well as efforts of the U.S. and its allies to maintain a stranglehold on Africa through Africa?
It's not really clear, even though Doumbouya had made statements against France, and it was quite interesting because he had been a protege of the French military and security system. And when the coup took place, troops from the U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM, were present in Conakry on the same day that this coup d'etat took place. And this pattern continued from Mali, where the coups were carried out by people who were close to the French military as well as the AFRICOM. And the same situation existed in Niger as well. Niger is one of the largest producers of uranium in the world. And now, under the CNSP government, they call for the removal of French diplomats and military forces, as well as AFRICOM troops. At least 1,000 were inside the country. And they also had a drone base, at least one, perhaps two drone bases in Niger. Uh, those have been dismantled, and the U.S. troops have been forced to leave. So that's very positive about the developments in the Sahel since 2022 and 2023. It's been a strong anti-French sentiment that has spread throughout the country. In Guinea, it's not clear exactly where they stand in terms of their relationship with the AES and others who have taken a strong anti-French stand in West Africa. So it'll be very interesting to see how these things play out.
What can you tell us about Guinea and BRICS and any historical relations with some in BRICS that are continuing and will continue to be good, depending on if Western imperialism sabotages it? Since Guinea has long been a member of the non-aligned movement, has had, well, I wouldn't call it good relations, but it's had good relations with America, as well as with, you mentioned Yugoslavia, USSR, and Eastern Europe and so forth. So any relations with some of BRICS that are continuing, but very unpredictable given the volatility of American imperialism currently, as well as France, Britain, and so forth, and Canada. I'm very
No,
curious.
I'm not aware of any relationship with BRICS as an institution, BRICS Plus. China does have investments in the mining industry in Guinea. But in terms of political influence, I'm not aware of any real political influence of China or any of the other BRICS countries inside of Guinea itself. Um, the former president, Thabo Mbeki of the Republic of South Africa, who succeeded President Nelson Mandela, went there about 3 years ago to deliver a lecture. He delivers an annual lecture on African affairs, and that was delivered from Conakry. But what impact these developments are having in Guinea are not clear.
Well,
But what is clear,
unfortunately, Thabo Mbeki and even the current president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, the ANC on paper, the African National Congress on paper, is supposed to be democratic, socialist, kind of African Marxists and so forth, but they've governed like right wingers, have been way too friendly with the rapacious mining companies and so forth, and that's more or less the same thing that we see in Guinea currently. Correct.
well, in terms of South Africa, even though they did not move towards socialist orientation after 1994, there have been reforms that have been instituted there in the healthcare system, within education, and so forth. Nonetheless, despite moderating the actual ANC policy that came out of the Freedom Charter of 1955, they still are a target for destabilization on the part of the United States. Even under the previous Biden administration, they were accused of selling arms to the Russian Federation and therefore siding with the Russian Federation in the special military operation in Ukraine. When Trump came into office, the South African ambassador to the United States, who's a longtime ANC cadre, was expelled for no reason by the Trump administration. So the relations between the ANC, well, the Government of National Unity, which the ANC is the dominant force in now in the Republic of South Africa, that relationship with Washington is very strained. They've suspended all assistance, material and economic assistance to South Africa. And Trump, when Cyril Ramaphosa came to the United States earlier this year to try to discuss or to refigure relations between the two countries, he was ambushed by the White House with false accusations of carrying out genocide against the settler colonial population inside the country. They showed videos of the economic freedom fighters, which are no longer, the leadership of the EFF was expelled from the ANC under Jacob Zuma,
Yeah.
many, many years ago. And they were showing videos of the EFF chants, that were popular during the armed struggle phase, and saying this constituted the
Yeah,
formal policy of
kill
the
the
ANC.
poor and whatnot. Yeah.
Yes, which Ramaphosa denied. He said that we do have a multi-party system. We do allow the formation of political parties, and we do guarantee under our Constitution freedom of speech and the right to form political associations and political parties. Trump didn't want to hear that at all, whatsoever. So, just to clarify the fact that despite the fact they have not moved, uh, to the degree that a lot of other people feel they should, even the South African Communist Party has criticisms now. They're one of the key allies, were one of the key allies in the so-called tripartite alliance with the Congress of South African Trade Unions, the South African Communist Party, the South African National Civic Organization, and so forth, and a lot of the youth groups, ANC Youth League, COSAS, and others. They're still under fire by U.S. imperialism. So we have to be clear, about that. And the splits that have occurred within the ANC over the last several years that brought about the Congress of the People, COPE, which is pretty much a right-wing split, and the EFF leaders who were expelled for ill discipline by the ANC, and now the so-called MK party under Jacob Zuma, who was also asked to resign during his presidency over allegations of corruption. This has fragmented the ANC as a ruling party. If you look at the results of the last elections, the ANC won like 40% of the vote. The EFF won approximately 8% of the vote, and the MK party won about 14% of the vote. Now, if you add that up, 40, 14, and 8, they would have had enough political support to form another ANC-dominated government. But because of these splits that have occurred inside the party, they were forced once again to set up a government of national unity with the Democratic Alliance, which is, a right-wing political party. They had done this in 1994 and 1995 with the National Party. There was a government of national unity which collapsed in late 1995 and early 1996. So the ANC has ruled since 1994, and particularly since 1996, as the dominant political force inside of South Africa. Nonetheless, as a result of political problems, internal political problems, and also the overall economic crisis inside the country, they were forced to form an alliance with the Democratic Alliance, the DA. And that is a very shaky alliance as well. There's strong tensions that exist within an alliance. Also, the SACP has talked about running candidates on their own in the next upcoming elections. How that's going to turn out is not clear.
So that's quite fascinating, and looking
It
forward, of
is.
course, to doing deeper dives into that when we cover South Africa a couple of
Right.
months, a couple of weeks from now.
But I just
But
wanted to mention that Kwame Ture, after the overthrow of the PDG in Guinea in 1984, remained inside the country, even though the revolutionary government had been overthrown. And in 1986, he was arrested briefly under the guise that he was attempting to overthrow the military regime in Conakry. And he was soon released, due to protest. And well, the news was widespread internationally because he was a major figure in African American and Pan African politics. So he was released during that time period. But later, in later years, about another 10 to 12 years, he was diagnosed with advanced prostate cancer and died in 1998. Now, he said that he had had symptoms of the disease even prior to him being diagnosed. And he had gone to doctors in Guinea. The healthcare system obviously is not very good there, particularly after the overthrow of the government. And they told him it was due to bad blood, whatever that means. Then he went to Cuba for a OSPAL conference later in 1996. and possibly he should have stayed there for medical treatment.
Yeah.
But then he came back to the United States, and then it was obvious that he was extremely ill. He went into the hospital, he was diagnosed, and eventually he did pass away in November of 1998 in Guinea. He had gone back there despite his advanced cancer diagnosis. So I just wanted to mention that he still remained there even after the counter-revolutionary coup d'etat in 1984, and he did that at great risk and probably imperiled his physical health as well, that led to his death at the age of 57. So all of these factors are very, very important when we look at the post-colonial trajectory of African politics. And we'll see what happens in Guinea as a result of this referendum, whether it's able to stabilize the country or not. There's been demonstrations going on there for a number of years demanding the return to civilian rule. Doumbouya kept postponing the elections up until this point. And what the character of this referendum is, whether or not it satisfies the youth and the trade unions, the farmers, and others inside the country remains to be seen. Some indication of this will, of course, become clear next week as the results of the
go ahead.
result of the referendum comes in.
Well, that's perfect segue to final question. So, you said that currently the left in Guinea is very weak, but let me just ask the question again. So, currently, does Guinea currently have a strong left-wing movement? And any final thoughts you want to share about Guinea and how, if the nation really wanted to overcome the scourge that is major poverty, intergenerational poverty, and all the terrible ills that comes with it, and certainly eradicate it, it really, the only way forward really is African socialism, Pan-Africanist socialism, Marxism, or barbarism, the endless misery that is austerity. But that being said, given what you've taught us and given my own, elementary research into Guinea, is that they do have to learn from past mistakes when they try when under Touré they did try to advance African socialism, but made very, very many fatal mistakes. So I'm very curious your response on
that. There was an effort, as I said, in 1992 during the multi-party elections to bring about a revival of the PDG. And even as late as 2007, there were people that, even from the United States, that went there in an effort to revive the PDG. But due to the unrest that developed during that year, they were forced to leave the country. So it's a very difficult situation politically. I'm not aware of any formidable or viable left-wing party or movement in Guinea right now. There may be, but if they do exist, it's largely underground. And how do you make your presence and your political acumen felt throughout the country and throughout the world if there's not an openly functioning left-wing and socialist-oriented political party? So it's a tragedy what has happened in Guinea, and we can only hope, and we can work in whatever way we possibly can to bring about some type of renaissance within the country. I mean, it has a lot of potential in regard to mineral resources and strategic resources inside the country. Nonetheless, with the dominance of world imperialism, it is extremely difficult for any independent African state to break out on its own and try to bring about some type of socialist orientation within those countries. BRICS, even though they don't have uniformity politically, is a huge threat to U.S. imperialist dominance. France, interestingly enough, the former colonial power in Guinea and other West African states, attempted to join BRICS. They actually made a request to join BRICS a couple of years ago, and they were turned down flat, as they definitely should have been,
Yeah.
because they would only be acting as spies for the United States and the UK and NATO. So they were turned down. So none of these countries have been allowed into BRICS. And this is a very, very important decisions that they've made. And groupings like BRICS, which now represents more than half of the world population. You have the non-aligned movement, which also represents the majority of the world population. The group of 77 plus China represents about 80% of the world's population. So the US sees the writing on the wall. The Trump form of capitalist political and economic orientation is not being done from a position of strength. It's being done from a position of weakness. If we look at the state visit on the part of Trump to the UK this week, which was supposed to have lasted 3 days, seemed like to me it only lasted maybe a day and a half. He told a press conference yesterday that as a result of his tariffs against countries throughout the world, the United States has collected $17 trillion as a result of tariffs. I don't believe that. Where is the $17 trillion? It's not being reflected in the rising unemployment rates, the rising inflation, the housing shortage, the crisis in education. It's not being reflected there. The United States the government could close down if the Senate does not vote on temporary measures. The House voted in favor of this temporary measure to keep the government open. The Senate may or may not vote in favor, and the government will be shut down for a second term under the Trump administration. It was shut down during his first term. It could easily be shut down in this term.
Even though the Republicans are a majority, though. The Republicans
That's why they won in the House. They won in the House. It was only one Democrat that voted in favor of this stopgap measure. One Democrat. So it was largely along partisan political lines. And the Republicans have the majority in the House of Representatives as well as in the U.S. Senate.
And
they control the White House. So all this belongs to them. All this belongs to them. And it was interesting during Trump's visit to the UK. He was largely kept at Windsor Castle, which was fortified. And they had them riding around in horse-driven carriages in the Windsor Castle area. He never went into London, as far as we knew, where thousands upon thousands of people were out demonstrating from all different political stripes. People from the left, the Palestine Solidarity Movement, liberals, environmentalists, and so forth were out in force saying that he wasn't welcome there at all. So he can tell all the stories he wants about the economic revival under his Make America Great Again campaigns, but the reality is on the ground that the U.S. is deteriorating economically, and they also lost tremendous influence. I mean, look at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit that took place. Look at the ceremony surrounding the 80th anniversary of the victory over Japanese aggression during the World Anti-Fascist War. People were there invited from Africa. The Russian Federation leader, Vladimir Putin, was there. The president of Belarus was there. The president of Zimbabwe, Emerson Mnangagwa, was invited, and the president of Congo Brazzaville, Denise Sassou Nguesso, was also present, and other leaders, progressive leaders from Latin America, were also there. So we have to ask ourselves, who's really isolated?
Yes.
They say Russia is isolated, but that's not true. It's not true at all. Despite all the sanctions that have been leveled against the Russian Federation over the last 3.5 years, the economy has not collapsed. And in fact, it's grown stronger since all these sanctions. And the only thing Trump can say is that he's disappointed with Putin and that he's going to impose sanctions against Russia. Well, what about the sanctions that are already in force over the last 3.5 years and even before? They were imposed by the Biden administration. So what he's saying does not make any real sense politically. So that's where we are right now around the world. And we'll see what happens in Guinea and other countries in West Africa in the not too distant future. The AES states are facing tremendous challenges in the security areas because these jihadist groups who are funded by the intelligence services inside the United States are continuing to carry out massacres and sabotage against Niger, Mali, as well as Burkina Faso.
And also important to add, North Korea was also part of that big
Yes,
celebration China
Kim
of
Jong
the
Un.
victory against Japanese fascism, which the Communist Party led by Mao Zedong, the Communist Party and its resistance led by Jong Kim Kim
Kim
Sung,
Il Sung.
yeah,
Yeah,
Kim Sung Il, with of course was vital up was vital in that. And you also mentioned Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam earlier. Ho Chi Minh and his Vietnamese National Liberation Alliance, which was very communist and so forth, also was also in the front line against the vicious Japanese fascist aggression, which we don't have time to talk about, but we
right.
should pay tribute to that, because if we thought that the Nazis were bad towards towards their colonial subjects, the Japanese took atrocities, took disgusting human experimentation, and took human rights abuses on a whole another level. So we should be paying tribute to that, and it sadly is often criminally overlooked and underrated
Yes,
when we
on an
think of World
official
War
level.
II.
They had virtually colonized the Korean Peninsula. There were two treaties of colonial domination in the late 1800s over the Korean Peninsula. And they fought from 1905 all the way up to 1945 against Japanese domination. And even in China, um, the Communist Party under Mao Zedong did the majority of fighting, even during the United Front period with the Kuomintang.
Exactly,
They did most of the
exactly.
fighting. Lin Biao and his pamphlet talks about that, the anti-Japanese coalition that formed. And when the Communist Party took over in 1949, they fled to Formosa, which is today Taiwan. And China has grown very strong over the last 76 years, right on the heels of taking over as a dominant economic power right behind the United States. And in many ways, they're more advanced than the United States because their infrastructure is newer, it's more sustainable. They are leading in climate science, in climate energy, clean energy production. And the United States at this point doesn't even believe that there's a climate crisis
Exactly.
as the planet
But
is being burned
however,
up.
however, uh, however, as we close, what's the one thing that the non-aligned movement, BRICS, which BRICS led by China, South Africa, Russia, China, and India, and Guinea. What's the one thing that they all continue to make a mistake on? Thinking they can live peacefully in coexistence with America and its imperialist allies. No, they need to correct that mistake. You cannot live in peaceful
Yes,
coexistence with
it's like a two-state
America,
solution.
Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the European Union, and the NATO alliance. You cannot live in peaceful coexistence with them. So here's hoping that they correct that mistake and realize that they have to eradicate that system, the system of imperialism, which, as Lenin says, is the highest stage of capitalism. So,
Well, just to add to that point, look what happened to the Republic of Korea, South Korea technicians that came here to build a Hyundai LG plant. They were rounded up, detained, put in shackles, like our ancestors during the Atlantic slave trade, and carted off, put on airplanes. The
no.
departure of the plane, I understand, was held up for several days because the White House was pleading with them not to leave and not to take their people back, to return to that plant in Georgia, which had been fingered by a MAGA politician, saying that, why do we have these foreigners here? These jobs could go to people in the United States. That's absurd. They don't have the infrastructure to build this type of high-tech production facility. So the contradiction is that the ideology of the MAGA movement is clearly hampering their economic program. They need China, South Korea, even Taiwan, and other states. The Russian Federation, which sells tremendous amounts of oil, has sold oil and natural gas to Western Europe before that pipeline was blown up. They're suffering as well. Look at the conditions in the UK and France right now. The people are getting poor and poorer. The infrastructure is collapsing. In France itself, yesterday there was a general strike that brought out over 1 million people in Paris and across the country against austerity. They've had 4 prime ministers in France in less than 2 years. So it's clear that this war footing on the part of NATO against the Russian Federation is plunging Western Europe, the European Union, and the UK into further economic turmoil and decline.
Yes, and I'll also add, this, I haven't been able to cover Canada as much as I'd like to, but in recent Canadian news, the Minister of Transport, Chrystia Freeland, ghastly woman, who's associated with the far right Ukrainian expat community, she's been promoted to the special envoy to Ukraine. This is a person who cannot be more 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 ill, just not
pro-Ukraine.
Exactly. It's one thing to be pro-Ukraine, but she supports the most reactionary, expat communities, Ukrainian Canadian communities who
The
lionize.
Banderas, the
Yes,
right sector, and
exactly,
all those people who fought with
exactly,
the fascists
Ex-
during World
exactly.
War II. They can't deny that they covered up that they're Nazis that played a central role in the overthrow of the government in 2014. They were supported by the United States. It continues to be supported by the United States. So Zelensky, even though he's from a Jewish background, in effect is an alliance with the most far-right elements operating in Ukraine.
Yeah, and it's crazy how Europe seems to want to continue this ridiculous war, wants to continue this counterproductive war, which Russia is winning, and the longer they prolong it, and the more Russia continues to win, the more chances that Ukraine, as it once was, is going to be, partitioned and so forth. And that'll be because of Western imperialism, not because of, you can criticize Russia's invasion as being counterproductive, but this entire mess, this catastrophe that Ukraine finds itself in, Western imperialism is, of course, is to blame, is, the root of all evil in that respect. So
yeah, and
it's just not getting any better, and it's just not getting any better, and Europe just continues to want to go on this war footing, even though at the same time they don't want to put their own soldiers on the ground. They don't want to actually try to push Russia's military backs, even though they are going with this 5% spending of GDP on NATO, but hopefully more people protest against that. We see, of course, our friend Eve Engler, who is running for the leadership of the NZP, and he's running, on both an eco-socialist platform, but on a very strong anti-austerity and anti-Canadian imperialism. So it's going to be quite interesting to see.
Fascinating.
Where
He's doing that.
Yeah.
Fascinating. But if you looked at the press conference yesterday that Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK, and Trump, the President of the United States, delivered, Keir Starmer kept saying, we have to support Ukraine. He said it over and over again. And Trump said he's disappointed by Vladimir Putin. Disappointed? Are you his father? I mean, it's like somebody talking to their son saying, "Oh, I'm disappointed in you, son." He has no control over what Russia is doing.
Yeah.
So it's just an amazing scenario that we're facing right now. But the threat of world war, I believe, is real because you see the rise of fascism in the UK as well as in France and Germany. And inside the United States, they have openly proclaimed that they're, quote, going after the left because the left is championing political violence, but most of the political violence is coming from the right. The person that's accused of killing Charlie Kirk came from a Republican MAGA base. So it's quite interesting. To say that right now on American television, you risk losing your job, as Jimmy Kimmel did just a couple of days ago. But the Disney Corporation is going to lose a lot of money in this whole process that they ban late night television in the United States. And what alternative do they have other than banning it?
Exactly, and we have to continue to mobilize. We have to continue to mobilize against that. Hopefully, because there are divisions amongst the far right and the center right, which is becoming more and more far right. There are big divisions about what to do with Russia. Do we have détente with Russia, or do we continue to have these stupid, ridiculous Cold Wars on top of austerity? But we have
Yes.
to find a way to, how should I say, appease a very disgruntled population which needs jobs and so forth. So
Mm-hmm.
it's no, the capitalist system is
Is in deep crisis, not only economically, but also a crisis of governance. And we see that in France very clearly with the demonstrations that took place yesterday against austerity. And also underlying that, of course, is the anti-French sentiment that's pervasive, particularly in West Africa. Some of their largest and most profitable colonies have turned against them. So they're really, really facing imminent economic turmoil in France.
And here's hoping that the anti African, the anti French spring that we are seeing, I hope they don't make the same mistake as other leaders of the past, including those in Guinea that we've been talking about, where they think, well, if we just get rid of French imperialism, we can have good relations with America. No, that's never ever how that works. Well,
No.
well, we were joined on this All Things Africa edition, learning about the history and current affairs of Guinea with our always wonderful returning champion, historian, journalist, Pan-Africanist, leftist, and all-round anti-imperialist in support of all people power movements, Abayomi Azikiwe of Pan-African Newswire and Black Agenda Reports. Check out his work and all of his appearances on 1+1. Subscribe to Pan African Newswire and Black Agenda Report. Donate generously to them. Don't forget to do the same for 1+1. Donate to us, please, and share widely all of 1+1's content and encourage others to like us. And again, share and donate. The next country that we'll be exploring is Guinea-Bissau. Join us next week for that. Have a great weekend, folks. Good night and good luck. And yes, and all my best until then.